So, hello everybody. Keith and I have written the book Bob Dylan in London, and we thought we would just have a little chat about it to talk about how it all happened and how we're feeling about its existence. So, hi Keith.
Hello, good morning,
Hello.
everybody.
Hi. So, Keith, the obvious question: how does it feel?
How does it feel indeed? We finally got there. This was very, very much a labour of love for two Londoners who were Dylan crazy. And we first began the actual book, a little while ago, not too long ago. And you join us here on publication week, February the 4th. 2021, our book finally comes out, and it was really something we'd wanted to do to recognise Dylan's importance to London as a music centre, and really to explore some of the very, very wonderful tales of his time here in the early 60s, right through 78, and up to date, really. It's an important part of his musical career and of musical culture, and we hopefully have put across those tales and have finally told a lot of the story. At least that's what I feel, Jackie.
I look back on that time when we sat in a pub, can't remember which one, it was in central London somewhere, and you just said, shall we write a book? And then you kind of were like, well, we can write it about London. And I saw your point, because there isn't a book about Dylan and London, about that importance. And it did, the obvious thing was you would hit on a gap, and that seemed like really worth exploring. But then we had this question, didn't we, of what kind of a book? What were your original thoughts about what the book might look like, what sort of feel it would have?
Well, I think right from the beginning, we thought we wanted to have it as some kind of guide for people. I mean, the motivation really originally was to recognise the places in London that were important to Dylan and to music history that we wanted people to go and visit. We'd looked at, our original journey was to go to places and find where there were the plaques and the recognition and all the things of these wonderful things that happened, like, the first music video, where's the plaque? Where do people stand? Where do people go? The venues he played at. And, it was really, we always wanted it to be a usable guide, frankly, as much as a history. We could cram it with dates and venues and all sorts of things, but we wanted it first of all to be a guide for people so they could go around and visit these places in due course, but then also I think to tell a bit of the history and the tales. The stories we put in there are very much filling a gap. You look at all the Dylan books that there are, and some of them, particularly things like the 62-63 visit, there's very little. It's, wrong pubs, couple of paragraphs if you're lucky in most of them, and they were very important times to Dylan. And, we had a story to tell that no one had really got together and told before.
When was the first moment that you thought, actually, we're onto something here? This could be, not just, do you remember we used to say, oh, if we sell 5 copies, won't that be great? When was the first moment where you started to believe it could be a bit bigger than a book that just went round a few of our friends?
Well, I think really it was when we started to get the reviews coming in. And I think that, to be honest, which is quite late in the day.
Very late.
You don't know. You right up until the last moment, you think, is this going to be a book that just the family buy? But to be perfectly honest, it was when we were starting to get those early reviews, and they were absolutely wonderful. They were really effusive about what a nice book it was and what a great read it was, and people were enthusiastic about it.
Yeah.
I suppose maybe even taking a step back, when we were putting the book together, and for example, we wanted someone part of the story to give the forward, and we had Conor McPherson did that, who wrote Girl from the North Country, and is part of a modern part of the Dylan story in London. And the fact that he came back and was so wonderfully enthusiastic about it, I think then you think maybe we have something.
Yes, another thing, another point in the process, because I think being the one that was doing the initial editing, that there does come a point where you're editing something where you can't stand the sight of it a minute longer. You've read the same paragraphs over and over, and lovely Tony, who did our first outside edit, would come back and I have to change it all again, and then he'd go back for a second edit. But a big thing for me was when we got Caroline Curtis to do a professional edit for us. And before she gave her detailed feedback, her comment was, boy, I can see you guys had fun writing this. And that meant a lot. It was like, oh, she's picking up an atmosphere about the book. But then when she sent the final edit back of the book, it sat unopened in my email for 10 days. I was so scared that she was going to, say, no, there's no hope for this. And
I think there's probably, we're probably not alone in this, but I think there's probably a huge amount of author imposter syndrome out there. You and I first in this journey went to the Troubadour Club to see where all the pictures of Dylan and the plaques and etc. were, and of course there was nothing at the time.
No, there was the Shackleton room, which I will never forget.
Room. Yes, which wasn't Len Shackleton, the Bolton footballer of the 1940s, but was some Arctic explorer, I'm told. So, who had absolutely no connection with either, I don't think, London or
the Troubadour. No, he was just that the owner or the manager of the Troubadour was a bit of a fan of polar explorers.
Yes, which seemed bizarre when you were sitting on music history.
Crazy.
You wouldn't have worried so much if there'd been, a Jimi Hendrix room or a Paul Simon room.
Sure.
But the fact that Bob Dylan, who famously played there in late 62, 63, wasn't recognised.
Was there one tiny picture somewhere?
I don't think there was a single
not
picture.
A single thing.
No. Not a single picture. Not even the picture that we put up of him in the Troubadour.
In the Troubadour with Martin Carthy and the little crowd he had there. Absolutely amazing. So what's your favourite? We've got 8 chapters, 8 locations that we really focus on, although the first chapter, the folk clubs, is obviously covers more than one location. What's your favorite of the locations? Put you on the spot.
It's hard. I mean, the Troubadour will always have a great place in our hearts, certainly. But it's being able to put the Tregunta Road chapter together, and the fact that it's not been recognised. I put my own importance on him meeting Robert Graves.
I know.
I think it kickstarts something else. That's.
Where did you go? Because I remember we had our first meeting with what was then the Bob Dylan Experience. When you made the suggestion that they changed their name to the Dylan Band, which there was a little bit of resistance and not sure about there. But we met in the Mitre in Greenwich, I think, and you had done this digging about Tregunta Road and the Robert Graves meeting, and you were really excited and you were telling me about it. And I must admit, at that first occasion, I was thinking more about our meeting with the band. I didn't quite get the significance of what you were telling me. But where did you even come across the connection?
Well, it was putting several things together. I mean, the meeting, I didn't unearth that. The meeting was known. The meeting is mentioned in Chronicles, so Dylan actually mentions that, and he mentions he had a walk around a square, and in Chronicles it has the wrong name of the square, which it was a name that didn't exist at the time.
Paddington Square.
We knew it was there. We knew it was within that vicinity. You could look up from certain sources where he was staying at that time, where they were partying.
That really was detective work, wasn't
But you
it?
didn't
Yeah.
have to go too far to find all those connections and find the name of the band that Dylan vaguely alludes to that were playing at this party. And you can find the name of those guys, Los Valderramos, and you can get to that without too much detective work. But the fact is, was nice is that no one had put two and two and two and two together through all this time, you know, to actually look where that was. And I think also I remember how important Robert Graves was as a literary figure in the 60s and 70s. He's been a bit lost now, but you know, the books he had, I Claudius and Goodbye to All That, were huge international bestsellers. And you know, at that time, White Goddess, which, you know, Robert Graves put out as his sort of mythical take on life and goddesses and everything else, you know, the counterculture really loved that. They lapped that up, but that was a bit lost, you know. But the importance of Dylan meeting someone so huge in the literary world, you know, it was just come out of New York folk clubs. You know, he meets famous folk singers in New York, but this is a guy who was globally a major literary star, and they didn't get on. They're never going to get on because Graves is a pompous English guy, and Dylan was an upstart, barely out of his teens from New York. They were never going to be great mates, but they did talk, and it did have an effect on Dylan. And he did talk. We know from other meetings he talked about it a lot, and he talked about White Goddess a lot. You know, and there's in Chronicles at the time, I wasn't aware of what it was all about. You know, I wouldn't know how important that meeting would be.
No, it was really good work you did there, and obviously took that to the World of Bob Dylan conference. They accepted your paper. I remember when you sent it off, and again, then you got the reply, "Yes, we'll come and talk about it. It's original material." Fantastic.
Yeah, no, and it was nice, and it was really joining the dots on all those elements and finding. I mean, it you know, and I've had this discussion with Richard Thomas and others. You know, I find it quite significant for a songwriter, and you look at other songwriters. You British Museum, I've seen the scribblings of Lennon and McCartney, you know, and it's scraps of paper and they write down the lyrics. Pretty much everything is typed from there on in. You know, Dylan knows he wants a literary, you know, he sets out on, you know, Tarantula didn't come out for so many years. We forget how early it started.
He was already writing it in what, 63 or 4 for sure.
He wanted to be a novelist. He had literary aspirations. And I think a lot of that came from meeting Robert Graves and thinking, you know what, I could do that. You know, it's not that difficult. You know, I personally, and it's not explored in the book because we don't go down those alleys, but I personally feel that a good candidate for part of the amalgam of Mr. Jones in Ballad of a Thin Man is Robert Graves. You know, Dylan is writing about someone who doesn't understand, you know. Yes, he had all those run-ins with journalists, and I think they come into part of this makeup. I think the fact that there is that band with the trombone and all these sorts of things alluded to, I think some of it, and we will never know, again, it's conjecture, comes from that party.
Sure.
You know,
so that's your
change things for him.
So that's probably your favorite chapter. I think it's rightly your favorite chapter because of the originality and making those connections. I think mine has to be Savoy Steps, and the you know, especially when so many people say, I had no idea that Savoy Steps at Subterranean Homesick Blues was filmed A, in London, and B, in this almost unchanged cobbled alleyway that you can still go to and do your own version. So
I think, and you're rightly proud of that, because I think what you've done there is, you know, we knew that was not New York as everyone kind of always believes. We knew that was Savoy Steps, but actually what you've unearthed is the definitive story of that. So that is the story of Subterranean Homesick Blues there. And that's
Yeah.
a tale it's not a tale that hasn't been told, it's a tale that's been half told,
Yes,
you know.
exactly. I just love it because Don't Look Back is a film I can watch over and over. It's painful in places, I have to admit. You know, there's a kind of slightly excruciating feeling about some bits of it, particularly where, you know, Joan Baez is being humiliated. But I love Don't Look Back. I love the story of how it all came about, and D.A. Don Pennebaker. And then the story, I really find it extraordinary that they made these 3 attempts to film Subterranean Homesick Blues. When you see it down that alleyway, it's impossible to imagine it could ever have been conceived of being filmed anywhere else. It's so perfect. And when you see the rough cut of the one on the roof of the Savoy Hotel, and the wind, and Dylan's wrestling and looking so uncomfortable and cold, and then in the gardens, where every time I watched it, all I could see was Allen Ginsberg. It was obviously hot, so he takes off his jacket, hands it to the person he's with, hands his jacket to that person, then takes off his jumper. I think he ties his jumper around his waist, puts his jacket back on. Meanwhile, on the side, there's Dylan doing the cue cards, and yet my eyes are riveted by Allen Ginsberg, who himself, of course, was just such an important part of Dylan's story. I think I love.
And
Allen
I think
Ginsberg.
also, I mean, that Savoy Steps, that pretty much one take there, is so slick.
Oh, it's amazing.
The cards,
Yes.
he couldn't have done it better.
No,
you know,
no.
it looks like that was probably filmed over about a week to get it right, but
Yeah.
it wasn't. You know, it just suddenly works.
Yeah, and it can't have been easy holding that great big bunch of Savoy laundry cards, the cards that backed the shirts in the laundry. They were quite big, probably not exactly lightweight, and then having to manipulate every single one in order and throw them down, and he did it amazingly.
And it works. It works so beautifully for the song.
It does. Perfect.
You know, we now know, because, you know, I mean, this is essentially the first real music video. And in a way, you know, you've not had anything simpler, more fitting and slicker than
and imitated.
Totally imitated. Whoever came up with the idea of just doing it that way, it worked completely straight off. And you know, it's been rarely bettered as a music video in all that time.
What a great story. What a great story that is.
And it's wonderful, again, that motivational aspect of wanting people to go to these places. You know, when people can go to these places, you know, you stand where Dylan stood and the backdrop is exactly the same. You know, it's all still there. I mean, even down to the wall and the sign of Queensgate Mews is completely unchanged. It's remarkable how many landmarks in the book, you know, from whole buildings and you know, the Troubadour, you can stand in front of the mirrors that you can see in Dylan pictures. Lots of it is unchanged.
It's amazing.
But lots of it is up to now has been a little bit ignored and a little bit unloved.
Plenty more to be done, indeed. So weren't we lucky to meet Julia as well? Because that was another point where I thought, hey, this book works because we've given it to an artist. We've given your Tregunta Road chapter to an artist, and she's obviously got a picture from that. And then she came out with this. I was so not expecting it. Because it was this casual picture of, I think, Dylan sitting up on the kitchen table or work surface or whatever it was, and guitar and his mates and this pot of stew and the bottles around, and just to make it, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm there, you know, I'm actually there in that kitchen, it's real.
Well, that's right. I mean, I think her illustrations made the chapters come alive in a way that photographs, we could have put a photograph of the front of 9 Tregunta Road and people would have gone, Yeah,
So
it's a
yeah,
big
yeah,
house. But it
yes,
wouldn't have told you the story, and it
no,
wouldn't have made
no,
it come alive in the way
no.
that Julia's illustrations have.
It's the real thing. I was just going to say before we wind up, my favorite illustration is the Mayfair Hotel illustration, where Dylan is sitting at the bar looking pretty miserable, surrounded by all the characters that were in that. I think they called it the Crocodile Bar because it had real
Yes.
live caimans, and it had a man walking around with a parrot on his shoulder. And you can just think that this was in the first Dylan's first stop at the Mayfair Hotel in '62, when he didn't last very long. And
No,
you can see that Julia has just captured how uncomfortable he was with that kind of environment.
no, absolutely.
Much more comfortable sofa surfing and hanging out with Martin Carthy and where all the other places where he ended up bedding down. So yeah, I love that illustration. It brings a smile to my face every
I
time.
really love the Savoy one.
I
I
love
think
the
that
Savoy
looks
one
so
as
good.
well. Yeah,
The
it
Albert
is.
Grossman and everything else. That's a perfect encapsulation. I mean, there's so many images.
Yeah, exactly. And
that
the
kind of
cover,
fit
of
with
course,
Savoy.
the cover illustration of the Royal Albert Hall. The minute we saw that, we both fell in love with it, didn't we?
Yes, yes,
That Dylan all by himself in the spotlight, looking
yes,
out on the beautiful Royal Albert Hall. Did I tell you I did the tour of the Royal Albert
yes, you
Hall?
did. Yeah,
Yeah, that was fun. I have been to the Royal Albert Hall. I've seen, I've even seen ice skating, I think, at the Royal Albert Hall.
right.
But to be, to just sort of be up in the gods and to think, wow, Dylan stood on that stage. That's amazing. That's
No,
amazing.
absolutely.
So
And now
where
we're
next, Keith?
dying.
What in terms of this book, hopefully it's going to generate a bit of interest and things like tours people will be interested in, and your virtual tours that you take
Yes.
part in.
Well, we've still been able to do the virtual tours. Of course, we've got the UK publication is this week, February the
Yeah,
4th.
yeah.
We've also got a slightly elongated publication date for America, which is September. And one hopes that life may have changed a little and people may be able to be tourists again by
Yes.
September, and certainly beyond September. You
Yes.
hope it's the usable guide. It's nice because the feel of it is absolutely right as a book. We wanted it to be almost pocket size, so you can use
Exactly.
you can go around, so you have the map there,
Yeah.
and that comes out nicely in that
Yeah.
size. It looks
No,
perfect.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so thanks everyone for watching. Keith and I have a chat about the making of our book, Bob Dylan in London, Troubadour Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And if you're interested in finding links to the book, and we have got some t-shirts and hoodies. Keith is modeling one of the hoodies. I don't think you can see it. If you just click on the, there it is. If you just click out on the description, you'll find links to everything else. Keep watching the channel. We'll be uploading all sorts of goodies related to Bob Dylan and his time in London. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.